Okay, look at that. Yeah. Hopefully this is gonna work. I'm gonna have to hold this. It's gonna be a pain.
You knew it this show?
Yeah, for today I am. Smart asses. All right, let's see if this works. Hello. Testing. This is the COSE working group. I am not Keping or Justin. I'm pinch hitting for them. They should be remote in the session in the Jabber room. Yeah, he's in an airport and he said he's got crappy Wi-Fi, so hopefully this will work. That's not going to work because that's too big. Well, I don't know why it's doing that. I'm not going to mess with it. Yeah, fair enough. So this is the IETF. There's no well, and I have no idea why the slide is doing that. It's like you think I've just never done this before. Page fit. Actual size. Fuck. Whatever. All right. It's the screen size, whatever. So it's this is the no well. Basically, the brief summary is that that you agree to our IPR rules. You also understand if you speak at the microphone, things are being recorded. There's a link there at the bottom or a bunch of information about BCPs that you should note. Requests to start the meeting session off. I need a Jabber scribe and I need a minute taker. Oh, got a Jabber scribe already. Thanks, Yov. I need a minute taker. We can't go on unless we have a minute taker. I don't need narrative minutes. What I need is like action items. We discussed this. This is what the group decided. So it's not really all that hard. Anybody want to be famous? Yeah, you get a star if you actually take notes. I have plenty on my laptop because I often volunteer to do that. Most of the people I know are people that are going to be at the microphone a lot. So you don't have a laptop, do you? Like you. Dave, do you want to do us a service and just take some bullet notes? Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. The blue sheets are circulating now, or the blue sheet. Please make sure to sign it. Here's our agenda. I actually don't have access to upload slides, so this is an agenda that we're going to bash. The first thing that we're taking out, I got slides from Goran on the ephemeral Diffie-Hellman overview over COSE. The ACE object security got fixed apparently on the list, so that item is going to be dropped. So that definitely means that we're going to have time to go all through the CBORT encoded message syntax for 40 minutes, which I think is pretty long based on the number of slides we have. And the additional algorithms, 20 minutes if we have time, and I think we're going to get at least half of that back. So without further ado, let's see if these slides have been uploaded. Yeah, use this microphone.
Hello.
Sorry. Like learning how to do this. Put it there. Put it here. Put it there. Ta-da!
Looks right.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm Göran Selander, and together with my colleagues Francesca and John, we have tried to start with the component which we think is missing from COSE. Yeah, next slide, please. So basically, COSE does a very good job in making a compact representation of elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman static, and ephemeral static. And we would like, for the application security work, in terms of using COSE in co-op, we would like to have an ephemeral version of Diffie-Hellman. So that would be two-pass protocol. And we made a first attempt. It's actually second attempt. First attempt, Ilari shut down very quickly. So we don't make any more experiments now. We'd like to have good feedback on this. So what we basically are using COSE for is for transporting ephemeral public keys. And there are two cases. One is that we have pre-shared keys between client and server for authenticating the ephemeral keys. So that would be using the COSE Max0 tagged object. And then the other version is that we have exchanged raw public keys between the client and server. And then we're using COSE signed tagged. And then we try to fit all the important parts of the protocol into this message, into these COSE messages. So that's basically what we've done. And there is a 0.1 version uploaded today, which is doing something else from the 0.0 version. And we're really interested in getting comments on that. I suppose you can do this, even if we didn't do it right the first time. I suppose it's possible to do this right somehow. So we're longing for feedback and interested people to give comments. So now some questions for that's next slide, please. For the group. So we assume this is out of scope for COSE. We would happily leave it to COSE or do it in COSE or whatever, but we suppose this is not in scope. That's a question. I can take all the questions and you can get the answers later. Is there any other activity on or need for embedding security protocols in COSE? We think it was really nifty to have a compact format for exchanging, as a carrier for protocol messages. Maybe there is some other activity also interested in that. Third question is specifically on the protocol we designed. Are the COSE objects we use well-formed? In the sense, for example, in the signed Diffie-Hellman, one of the messages we need to, what is important is to identify the receiver. For example, in the Diffie-Hellman exchange, you also include the identity of the sender and the receiver. And the question is, which field should we put the receiver in? So in our case, we have a pre-identified receiver, so we put it in the external AAD. But maybe there's some other field, and Jim is nodding here. So that's the type of feedback we're looking for. And yeah, any other comments? So, and then I have another slide on key derivation, but maybe I could, if there are any comments on this, answers. Thanks.
Is this out of scope? I think it is out of scope because this is going to be very protocol based, so it's going to be for a specific situation. So it may not actually, for example, if the same thing may not apply in in IKE or someplace else. So it's not clear that this would be the right working group for it. I think that in point of fact, ACE is probably a more appropriate one. Yeah. Either that or core. I'm not too sure which. Depends on whether you think it's authorization and key distribution, which would be ACE. So that was what my first impression was.
It is currently an ACE draft, so that's yes. Yeah, that's where we started. Yeah.
Right. The one immediate feedback that I have for these is why are you using the KDF functions from TLS rather than the KDF functions that are in the COSE document?
Yes, and that brings us to the next slide, please. So COSE doesn't really reference a specification for deriving the DH shared secret. That's it. Okay, James nodding again. So I didn't find that. So I didn't find, for example, which specification is referenced. And I suggest we should add it to the COSE draft or provide a reference. And now you're saying that it already exists. And I must say I missed that point. Okay, so I have to discuss that offline. And on the question of a specific field for the receiver, we could take that offline as well. It's in there as well. Okay, so I need some pointers for Jim to the right place where I will find all the information I need. Thank you.
And I guess to try to minimize your getting bounced around to the different working groups, if you're not finding a home, let me know and we'll try to get the area directors to whack appropriate people. All right, next.
If they're going to make me stand in the square, they should at least give me a stool. Okay, so this presentation is either going to be very long or very short, and it's going to depend upon how much people argue, because basically all we're going to do is we're going to work through all of the current issues in the tracker which are not finished. Okay, first one. We have in COSE a partial IV, and one of the things that I thought might be useful to go with this is the ability to send a base IV as part of a COSE key structure. So basically, I defined this. It gives you a chance to distribute the base IV. You can do your XORs of your partial IV with your base IV, and everything is happy. And after I finished it and sent it off, I came up and started thinking, oh, this may not be as secure as I would like it to be, because we may be in the situation where if you distribute the same PSK for bidirectional traffic in both directions, they either need to have two different base IVs, if they're both going to count starting at 1, or they need to have a way to say, this is where each of the people starts counting. And that's not in the document. So a lot of this depends on whether we think people are going to, if we think people are going to distribute the same PSK for bidirectional traffic, as opposed to one PSK in direction A and one PSK in direction B, we may want to remove this from the spec and not have it. On the other hand, would be very useful for a lot of cases to have a standard way to say, if you're going to do the incremental IVs along with the base IV, here's a standard way of sending it. And this is something that I can see being used with some of the OSCAP work in ACE and COAP and CORE. So how many people think this is something we should save versus something we should trash? Do we think that anyone's actually going to use this? Crickets.
Mike Jones from Microsoft. I'll take the position on most of these that if we don't know that there's definitely use of it, we should drop it because this is extensible. It can always be added later.
That's definitely true.
Yeah, Francesca Palombini, we make use of this in OSCOAP, so it would be really good if we could keep this. So we defined this before it was defined in COSE. So if we can comply with COSE, that is better.
Hannes, but since you're having a separate document anyway, you could as well define it there if it's important. And it remains to be seen what really comes out of that document, like what is really then sort of the agreed content. Because at the moment, just because there's something in an individual document doesn't sort of create a dependency on what really needs to go into the working group document as such. So like anything that helps me to have this document as simple as possible is a good thing for me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Jim.
Göran Selander. I agree that simplicity is important. This is a specific feature I think is quite important. I mean, it's a way of combining a sequence number with an IV. So it's a very compact way. So we think this is reusable. It's not just a particular setting. We have it.
Is this similar to what we do in DTLS?
Yes, it's exactly the same thing as done in,
Okay, so you copied it
in TLS.
copied
So
it from there?
you take your incremental, you XOR.
So in
it
that
to this.
case, forget what I said previously. So there's on one hand there's simplicity, on the other hand there's the compatibility with all the other stuff that we have ever done before.
Hi, I'm channeling Justin Ritter. It's important for COSE to have an appropriate structure to allow for these different use cases, but doesn't need to cover all of those use cases directly.
Okay, so the basic sense of the room that I hear is it's probably worthwhile to keep this in, and we need to make sure that the language dealing with security problems is crystal clear. Is there anyone who is hearing something different?
All right, good. So we're keeping it.
Okay, next. Padding for encryption. One of the things that we've done is all of these algorithms are counter mode encryption. So the length of your message is well known. TLS has gone in and put in a way to have padding on messages. They get lucky. They manage to not have to actually pay any penalty in size for it. We would probably actually have to pay a penalty in size if we provided it. On the other hand, I didn't hear anyone say this is important. Current text is basically, we don't provide this. We give you a security consideration that says, hey, this is something you need to think about when you're creating your message structure. If the length of the messages are going to change based upon values, you need to do some sort of padding so that people can't just look at the length of the encrypted data and say, oh yeah, this is the value. I can tell the difference between yes and no because the length of the encrypted data is different. Is there anyone who thinks that we really need to deal with this in this document at this time? Okay, that was what I expected.
So no, we're not.
So what's there stays. We tell people it's a problem, but we don't try to fix it for them. Okay. Registry. What is the requirements for getting things into the registry? The current situation is there is a section of the registry which is the way I want to write it is it's basically first come, first serve, but you do have to pass an expert review to actually get the point assigned. And you do not have to provide a specification to get the point assigned. Number of people who have come back and said, no, we want to always require a specification to exist before you can get a point, even if it's company proprietary. We can't really let people just squat in the private space if they're doing this thing for outside of closed environments, because you may end up with two different companies squatting on the same private space point and start interfering with each other. once they actually get out and deployed. So that is a potential problem with people just using private space. We want to discourage that. That's what this extra first come first served space was designed to avoid, is you could do something that was company proprietary, but you would be guaranteed that your point was not going to collide with anybody else's. There is a similar feature to this in Jose where they have private namespace, which is identified by a URL, which is company based. We don't really have that same thing, hence the space in the registry. I know that in the past, both Hannes and Mike have objected to not having a specification required in this section. And I have fought equally hard that I think that we need to be able to register things without a specification. Do people want to argue on one side or the other?
Tero Kivinen, how about solving the problem by making them the experts? Then they can, require the specification if they want to. Because expert can, have his, he will select based on some rules he sets, which is okay, and it's okay for him to require that I have to see the specification. So if Hannes wants to have a specification, he might be the expert to look.
Hannes, so is the issue, is this about any sort of fields or the algorithms? Because the slide doesn't say.
All of the registries are set up the same way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm wondering whether that sort of like the approach of not even having publicly visible specification for the algorithm is such a great idea and in line with what we do in other working groups, right?
Yeah, I can, well.
I'm an expert for the IETF version 2 specifications, registers there, and I can't say if I want to give the number out if I don't see what it's used for, which means that I want to see some kind of specification.
Right.
Which means that either they need to have a point me a reference to some document somewhere that gives the reference, or they need to explain me, or actually the IANA will then forward me the request. They need to have some written stuff down. And
that's, yes. And that's why I said it was still expert review.
Yeah. So I think expert review is still, it depends what the expert says the level.
Yeah.
So I can just a little process interrupt, right? So having dealt with the IANA registries a lot, specification required actually means that it's like publicly available and all that stuff. You also have to remember that if you're going to do a coupon request to go in a registry, there's no proprietary information going on. Like they're not going to hide that. That's going to become public. You could also split the registry to have some part of it be like, specification required and another part be private. That's kind of up to you. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Hannes, I for the algorithm set registry, I would be willing to basically make that much, much tighter. I don't know that we want arbitrary algorithms to show up in space.
Yeah, Rich Sauls. Yeah, absolutely. The algorithms is the minimum. It's got to be public. Otherwise, people are going to get light bulbs that are controlling phones and bad things like that, right? I think I'd be in favor and suggest everything be public. But fallback would be a split space, address space. And if the private is only like 2 identifiers, that's cool.
Well, basically, what the way it's set up is the if you're public and you do specification required, you get the short ones, and if you don't, you get the long ones.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. I think you correctly identified the difference in the situation from Jose that made me think you needed a public specification, which is that in Jose, you can have string prefixes that are URLs that okay, this sub namespace is controlled by this entity, and they can sub-allocate in that to their heart's content. where in COSE, the good identifiers are this shared space of numbers, which is why, given it's a scarcer space, I would rather that people say, this is what I'm using it for in a publicly visible way.
I certainly would agree that it makes total sense to require the expected use or description of what it is to appear in the registry, just not the specification. So I can modify that to reflect that consensus. Is there anyone who thinks that's wrong?
Your Honor, Schäfer, I still think private subspace would be useful for even for stuff like experiments.
There is a private subspace as well.
Okay. And expert review for the non-private part.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Operation time. We have not. That's why it's an open issue and why it's discovering here. It's on here. I have put in an operation time field. Mike has objected to its existence on several occasions. It is here basically to say this is what time I created this security object. It does not necessarily say this is what time I created the content that's in the security object. They may or may not be the same time. It is here, at least in part, because there are security operations which do not have their own content, such as counter signatures, and content types, such as just a plain text thing, which do not have a field as part of the content that they can store a creation time in if they want one. Things such as the CWT structure have the ability to have a time in them. And that time may or may not be the same as the operation time. So you could actually potentially have, this is what time I did the evaluation, this is what time I made the message, and this is what time the evaluation expires, all three of which are different. So the question is, do we remove content time from the spec, or do we keep it? And content time is currently a standard time looking thing, so it's a time and date. It is not some sort of nonce counter field, which was suggested at one point.
Francesca Palombini, as discussed in the GitHub, I think we should keep it.
This is Hannes. Is it, would that be similar to, let's say, a timestamp in a classical sense, like instead of having, so for the meant to be used as a replay protection mechanism? Or what is operation time sounds?
Okay, so I've got two problems with there, because my first question is, what do you mean by timestamp? Timestamp in terms of the standard PKIX timestamp?
No.
Yes.
No.
Timestamp in terms of this is what time I did something, and you can look to see if it is before or after some time?
No.
Yes, you could.
What I meant was timestamp in a sense of a mechanism to deal with replay attacks, like sequence numbers and nonces would be.
If you had synchronized clocks, you could.
Okay. But is it, I think I would stuff that into CWT and in a sort of a higher layer, not at this layer.
Well, in terms of CWTs, I would expect that it should be in the CWT, not here. The question is,
Right.
what do you do for things like a sensor reading? If you want to put a time on that sensor reading.
If you want to put a time on a sensor reading, you have some structures, again, at the higher level, like CNML, which include the timestamp, which provide the semantics to tie it, like what does this what does this time value actually refer to?
Right. The other situation that I would potentially expect to see it is, I've got a sensor that doesn't have a clock. It sends it to a proxy. The proxy adds a signature, a counter signature to it, and it wants to put a time in at that point.
But I wouldn't think that this is a COSE layer issue. I think that would be something that I would put in a document that Björn is working on, or in the CWD or somewhere else, depending on what, or in a CNML, depending on what you're actually trying to do. I think it's the wrong layer.
Mike Jones, Microsoft.
Well, wait a minute, but before you sit down. So basically, you're saying that anything that wants, you're saying that you basically will not be able to do times associated with counter signatures, and that's acceptable.
So I think
because a counter signature can't produce a second layer. There's no data layer for a counter signature. It's over existing data.
Yeah. So the layering that I think would be useful is to do everything that deals with the actual security mechanism just in the COSE layer, and the other stuff that deals with the application layer semantics in other documents. And I see that there's a little bit of an overlap between the two, which of course creates some challenges because people use it in the wrong way. They repurpose things and so on. So I'm not a big advocate of the counter signature to begin with. So I don't have that problem. But others are. So yeah. Okay. So I think it will then basically boil down to explaining very clearly on what this is used for and what not, to avoid problems.
The gist of my argument to remove it is similar to what Hannes had said. I have no doubt that this field will get created and used by some applications, and it's good for those applications. And indeed, we've got an extensible system that they can use a registry to create such a field. I do have a problem with sort of opportunistically including non-cryptographic fields for some applications that we think are common. Let the apps define their own fields and keep this as simple as possible.
Okay, so other than myself, are there any proponents of this, of keeping this in the document? You need to say so.
She did go to the mic and say that.
Okay.
Dave Woltermeyer. I'm kind of new to this, so I'm still trying to grok it all. But how would counter signatures work without this? Because I think we might have a use case with the SWID tag binding work in SACM for counter signing using COSE. So how would that work without this?
Counter signatures wouldn't have a time until someone defined it.
And then how would that time be defined?
Up to the application which got there first.
But I have a clarification question even for the counter signature time case. Isn't the counter signature defined to be over the payload and the protected headers?
It has its own protected headers too.
Okay. But my point is that even using the extensibility mechanisms, an application could define that an operation time be put in the protected header, and then the counter signature does have an operation time that's protected. So again, to achieve the semantic intent, you don't have to have the syntax in this spec.
Okay, I'm channeling again. Justin Ritter says, given the types of things people are trying to solve with this, this should be a token layer item. If it's the cryptographic envelope layer, it belongs in COSE. And also from Ludwig Seitz, keep.
Okay. My sense of the room is it's pretty much evenly split. Well, that doesn't really tell. Yeah, I'll tell you it's evenly split. Yeah. I'm open for suggestions on how to resolve this. Do I have an expert over here sitting me tell me that?
Mike Jones, given the answer to my clarification question that you can do the counter signature with operation time without predefining operation time in this specification, I don't see a compelling reason to keep it. Applications can define the operation time value that they'd like to have included in the protected headers. And it might not be this one. It might be a sequence number. It might be many things.
I guess what I want to know, if I was trying to judge the consensus here, is, you know, the people who want this, is this something that you're going to die on the sword for? Is this the hill on which you're willing to die? Or are you just sad that it's not there? Do you get my point? It's like, is this something that is like a drop dead, you got to have this thing? Or it's like, if we could define it elsewhere and put it in our spec, okay. Yes. Well, there's at least two of them, so. So. Is it important? How important is it? Okay. So
Okay.
I think we take it out then.
Okay. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
So next.
So next one. When we originally wrote the document, we were assuming that we were going to get done a little bit faster and CFRG was going to get done a little bit slower. So we basically said, we're not going to pick up the new Diffie-Hellman and signature algorithms from CFRG. So they have finished the Diffie-Hellman one. And the and the signature one is sitting there waiting for a shepherd to show up. So should we just go ahead and pull these 4 algorithms out of the additional algorithm spec and put them into this algorithm spec? My expectation is that the core people and the ACE people would really rather use these 2 algorithms, or this set of algorithms, than the current NIST algorithms. Although I don't know that that's actually a true statement. Do people want to speak in favor of or against pulling these algorithms in now?
Carsten Bormann. First of all, the NIST algorithms are not going away. So just to slightly modulate.
The NIST algorithms are not being removed from the document.
Right. So, yes, we have a lot of interest in 255.19. And I think it would be very good to have this shipped with batteries.
Is there anyone who's opposed to pulling them forward? Opposed to pulling these from the additional algorithms draft into the core message draft? Okay.
Mike, just a coordination point that you know of, but some of the room may not, that there is one remaining Jose draft, which in fact is about Jose identifiers for these algorithms. So it would be good for the two working groups to coordinate to do it in a similar way.
Yeah. Okay. So the core message security document has stated that they really do want to make the algorithm field optional in the protected headers. And they have requested that we provide them guidance on how to do so in this document. So there is, at the moment, an Appendix A, which I'm still not happy with. It needs at least one more rewrite before I'm going to be happy with it, which is providing guidance to applications saying, these are the sorts of things you need to do if you are not going to include the algorithm field as a mandatory field in the protected in the headers, either protected or unprotected. There have been some requests from people to not include this in the base document. Do people want to do you want to defend that position at the moment? Well, that's because you've objected.
Yeah, I like the idea of making the field optional, as I stated on the list a few times. And the reason is I compare this with the DTLS record layer or the IPsec AH/ESB header, where you include information like an SPI that allows you to identify, together with some other things, the key, and not send all sorts of metadata that relates more to the previous establishment of those keys in the actual message itself. And we have some of those use cases. I wrote them down based on request, and the multicast stuff is one of them. And so I think that's quite, like, for me, that's quite useful.
Mike Jones, I objected to this on the list largely just wearing my IETF crypto agility hat. It kind of scares me that we would send messages without algorithm identifiers, because that means that when you need to change the algorithms, the code will likely not be prepared to have a different algorithm.
Yeah, Carsten Bormann, in the cases that Hannes has cited, the algorithm would be in the security association that these data are sent under. But I have a different question. If you delete this text, is it going to turn up in the security considerations after 2 or 3, 4 more iterations of the document anyway? I mean, shouldn't we just leave it there because it's in the end security considerations?
This is Hannes. Carsten summarized the issue quite well that I was about to respond to Mike, but in addition to say that if you apply that same line of thinking, then neither DTLS nor IPsec with IQ version 2 has crypto agility, which is obviously not wrong. Crypto agility does not require that every message that you send carries an algorithm around. It just says that you are able to change the algorithm. Whether you do that in the setup phase or in each message itself, the crypto agility requirements don't say that. And I'm for some of these longer lived connections, which I assume will be there because you can amortize this connection setup, then over the longer usage, you obviously do that during the connection setup and have the crypto agility feature there.
And in point of fact, it may actually be that in these cases, agility is the last thing you want on a per message basis. You only want to have the agility at setup time, not on the individual messages.
So Francesca here. I just wanted to say that we proposed this for size reasons and for our scenario, since we didn't need it. And it was also discussed a lot in the mailing list, and like some messages about some mails about this were from September last year and some from February. Yeah, and I would refer to those. Ilari pointed some good points about that were just taken again, and also Sandeep and Ludwig mentioned this, so maybe, yeah, mailing list.
To Sean's earlier question, I will say that this is not a hill I will die on.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with the very next question.
Yes.
You know, Francesca and friends gave in on removing the operation time, and I'm generally in favor of removing stuff. So unless somebody else wants to take the position I took in the issue, I'm willing to drop this and let it go.
Okay.
And channeling Justin again. Security considerations is that the algorithm must be known by the decoding application, whether it's in the message or known out of band.
Well, it looks like we're going to keep Appendix A as it stands, which is guidance on how to make it optional. All right. Okay. This is another one that came from them, which is they want to be able to, the OSCAP people, they want to be able to save a few more bytes in some of the cases where they're using counter signatures, where they can derive the cryptographic context that is used to derive to verify the signature from the message data associated with the encrypted data, which is being countersigned. So basically, the key identifier in the encrypted message is the same key identifier that you're using for the counter signature. The context information will also identify the algorithm being used for the counter signature. This is a case where potentially saying that yes, we want to be able to remove the operation time is the right answer, because you obviously wouldn't have an operation time here since there's no protected attributes associated with the counter signature. So this is basically the only reason for doing this is saving some bytes in the message. This is something that is easy for us to define. It's easy for us to tell people how to do. This is not a hill I'm willing to die on. So if people really wanted to argue that we should remove this particular section of Appendix A, I would be less worried about that and say that that makes sense for them to define in their document, because I think this is far more specialized than what the rest of the things we've been talking about are. So do people have some opinions that they'd like to express here?
Göran Selander. So the use case here is we're looking at publish subscribe type of scenario when we have one sender, multiple receivers, and we want to have closed subscriber groups. So you want to encrypt with a symmetric key and you want to sign with a private key. And generally speaking, those objects are far too large because of the size of the signature already. So you can argue in two ways, saying that in proportion to the signature itself, what does these bytes matter? On the other hand, we'd like to make that, I mean, we imagine this to be actually an important component, because scenarios like caching or where you need to use the same response for multiple receivers is going to be common. That's basically one of the fundamentals of co-op.
Right. And just to be clear on his use case, the signature operation is used because you basically have a group encryption key. So there's no way to tell which of the owners of the group encryption key actually sent the message. It also allows for for the publisher subscriber proxy to validate that the message came from the right place as well, even without being able to decrypt the content. You want to talk about this?
Mike, again, this seemed like just one more thing for a few applications rather than general purpose functionality.
Carsten Bormann, this whole thing about counter signatures and so on may seem very specialized, but for Internet of Things applications, it's actually pretty important for a constraint device to be able to delegate some security functions to a different device. So I think it's not quite as specialized as it may look like.
Mike, again, it's been a while since I read the draft in this particular point, but for me and probably for some of the room, is it right that this is defining a second way to compute counter signatures? Or is this just adding a field to the protected headers for the one way of computing counter signatures? It's one or the other.
It is a second way of doing counter signatures because you don't have a protected headers field for this counter signature. However, the same is basically you drop one field from the structure that you encode and sign. So it's essentially similar. It's much like the difference between signatures for multiple signatures and signatures for one signature. So it's the exact same set of changes.
Francesca, I just wanted to say that some quick calculation showed that difference is around 5 to 9 bytes, depends on what you have in the header of the counter signature, which is big considering that COSE overhead is 9 bytes for our messages. So that would be only the overhead of adding the this header for the counter signature, the whole counter signature structure. Like COSE signature as a counter signature.
There's a byte cost, which is very quantifiable, and there's a complexity cost, which is less so. And the more options you put in the spec, the more if statements there are in complete implementations, and the less likely it is for developers to build the whole thing. You'll get subsets that aren't interoperable, and that's the cost that I'm concerned about here. Having 2 ways to do the same thing is usually a recipe for problems.
This is something I kind of expect that them to do in their spec. So it's going the definition is going to exist. If it is in this document, there's a higher likelihood that libraries are going to support it.
Francesca, I think when we discussed this with Jim in the mailing list, so in the beginning he was asking, should this be for counter signature another? So can you have both this COSE signature and just bit string? And then we decided that we should have another label for that. So that should make things simpler. As he was saying, just with COSE sign and COSE sign 1.
Okay, my sense of the room is that the core people with the possible exception of Hannes, who hasn't actually said anything, are for it. Mike's against it. I'm kind of agnostic on it. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet who'd like to voice an opinion?
Hi, Hannes. The reason why I haven't said anything about any of the topics on counter signatures is simply because we didn't hear anyone asking us for any of this. So we just like, I don't have an opinion about it.
What is this? Have you put this counter signature stuff into the OSCAP document? Is it in one of the appendices?
So in the OSCAP document, there is the symmetric encryption, asymmetric signature, which we really wanted to have an algorithm which did symmetric encryption
Counter signature.
and yeah, but we sort of without the Mac. That was to save in on the Mac. But this was the compromise where we have an AAD, we have an encryption on the Mac, and then we add a signature on top. So it's basically what we call symmetric encryption, asymmetric signature in the OSCAP draft.
So it is actually in the draft right now. Okay.
So the only the cases where we had sort of group communication were from the lighting sector, which is this other document, and there we didn't have that requirement. So there, the concern is about any sort of public key-based operation regarding whether it's signature or encryption or so. And in those environments, the guys who care about this commercial indoor lighting, they just don't want to use asymmetric cryptography for the reasons stated in that document. And so that stuff doesn't apply. I'm not saying that there are not valid use cases, but we just haven't seen them.
So, I mean, this is usually the argumentation that it's too heavy to use asymmetric signatures, or it takes too long time, and therefore you go for symmetric, which means that you don't really have source origin authentication. And this is, I mean, what we try to address here is that issue that we want source origin authentication.
Okay. So maybe sort of you could convince the lighting guys that this is the solution. Maybe it is. I don't think so. But and I think from my assessment of the threat model, which was heavily debated in the DICE working group, I think the symmetric key solution is okay. So I'm not trying to sort of reinterpret the solution that people sort of come up with there. Another case where we worked on single sender, multiple receiver cases was the software update mechanism. But there, the solution there, I think the current document, the current COSE document without counter signatures is workable there. I should look at the details, but my understanding is that I can use an asymmetric mechanism as a key wrapping mechanism to protect the symmetric key of let's say a firmware image, and then ship that and do the signature mechanism there. I don't need to have the counter signature for that purpose. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, but that still doesn't give you origination. Probably.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So I better look at that.
Anytime you send a message to more than one person, getting origination is hard.
Yeah, what the firmware updates, what I want is one party, the software update server, create to generate the symmetric key, then encrypt the whole image, then and then what do I then want? I have to look at what I really want there. I have to look at.
I mean, what the counter signature one would do is basically you'd sign the encrypted message to say it is from this person.
I think I would like to encrypt with an asymmetric mechanism the symmetric key that I sent, or for each of the receiving parties, and then send that in a separate envelope.
As long as they were separate messages,
it would be a separate message in the header. The header data would be a separate message. I have to look at this.
Yeah.
I think.
Just a clarification. I mean, about this lightning scenario, I think they have good reasons for using symmetric keys, but there are other use cases, like where these type of, where you actually would need the type of asymmetry between, because there are different parties that they are not trusted in a symmetric way. So I'm not saying that the lightning use case should use counter signatures.
What Juran said.
Yeah, okay. At this point, I think I'm seeing enough support that it should stay in the document. Okay.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
So, thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody. We're not. Yeah, but you didn't send it to me. Okay, so since we have some time, we're going to do a little talk about the algorithms, additional algorithms document.
Okay, really fast. I updated the additional algorithms document, and basically the thing I did in it was I updated the text dealing with the new CFRG algorithms. So if people want to look at that, that's more or less what I'm going to pull into the new document. At the beginning of March, I pinged the chairs about saying, hey, we've got this document on our list and you haven't assigned an editor for it. Can you do that? And obviously they have not asked for someone to come back and edit that document yet. So if people want to bombard the chairs to say that they should assign an editor for this additional algorithm document, I'd be all in favor of you doing that. Make them do their job. Other than that, I just basically cut some stuff that was it was still duplicate information from the version I did. Mostly it's just the CFRG additional doc things to look at. And I know that there's at least one thing that I screwed up really badly because I had totally missed the fact that the curves for EDDSA and the ECDH are totally different curves, even though that they're kind of on the same curve. So I totally messed that part up, and I will fix that as I pull it forward into the new document. If there's any other questions on it.
This is related, Mike Jones. The issue 12 was about having a document for the RSA algorithms.
Yep.
Or sorry, issue 21. And I this morning published a document with those algorithms, which is just your text from draft 5.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Everybody signed the blue sheets. I'm not, however, letting you go. Justin has requested that we go through the issues on the GitHub. So you're not going to get 20 minutes back of your life. You're going to, or 25 minutes. You're going to have to go through this with me to make sure there's anybody that has any comments on these. I haven't looked at this in forever, so hopefully we can all have a group discussion about this.
61,
Yeah.
we just discussed.
Okay, great.
60, yes, I know.
Okay.
54 is in the current version of the document.
Okay.
53, we just discussed.
Okay. Just discuss 52.
52, we just discussed. 51, we just discussed. 39, we just discussed.
Right.
That's the secondary key. That's the secondary algorithms document that the chairs haven't managed to assign
so
an editor for.
So that's on us. All right, fair enough. And that, by us, I mean the royal us.
Yes. That one is I need it. That one actually has a small edit that now needs to be done because we're moving creation. We are removing creation time.
So you're committing to make this change.
Yes.
Okay, great.
13 we just discussed.
Right.
9, we just discussed. 5. I hate this.
Yeah, well, all right, here we go. I knew we were going to get a good topic.
Sean, I was wondering, like, it seems like most of the things, of course, pending the update of the document, look like they are finished now, which is good. And I wonder, like, what is sort of the precondition to get this done? And I'm curious, like, we have this at the next IETF meeting. Before the meeting, we have this workshop, and I wonder whether we could add a day to do an interoperability test on this. So Jim has some implementations, and others are working on implementations. So maybe it would be useful to schedule something, a get together, and hash this, work on this, and then get the document.
Yeah, so I obviously can't volunteer the actual chairs, but I'll definitely bring it up with them. I mean, I'm jabbering with them in the back here,
Yeah,
so
sure.
I'll make sure they bring it up. But so basically what you're saying is before Berlin, you're thinking that it would be good to have some kind of like interop event.
Because it, for example, it will take us still a little while to work on implementation. So time-wise, I think that would work. Also, Ludwig, I believe, is working on implementation. So maybe that, like, if we announce it ahead of time, we could get something set up. You don't like that idea?
No, I did the implementation.
So I guess the question here is Jim, to get this document done, what's your time frame?
Yes, I should probably give a schedule. My expectation is I will have an update of all of this published by the time I get back to the United States, which is the 20th of April.
Okay, so put that down in the minutes.
And at that point, my expectation is
20.
The chairs should issue a last call, working group last call. I encourage people to do implementations. There are 3 implementations up on GitHub in the COSE working group, a repository right now, 1 for Java, 1 for C, and 1 for C#. They're all me. They're all me, so that they are not independent implementations in any way, shape, or form. Additionally, up there is a project which is full of test cases and examples. And some of them are things that work. Some of them are things that are supposed to fail and fail. So,
okay.
Question and comment, maybe a question to Jim. Just humor me. What is the reason we're adding PKCS 1.5 to the specification?
Yeah, we definitely weren't going to let that one go.
there is a subset of the group who believes that we should do 1.5 signatures. I am not in that subset.
I mean,
because some implementations only support those.
All implementations that I know of today do not support this algorithm.
Thank you. And the comment, you just mentioned a few implementations. There is an RFC on an implementation status section, RFC 16982. I recommend that you take a quick look and add one. Makes sense.
You're not channeling anyone. If there is a subset who believes that we need PKCS 1.5, why don't they come to the mic and explain why?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, because there is a.
Frankly, because it's tiring to have the same conversation over and over again. I understand there's resistance to it, but on platforms where you don't write the cryptographic algorithms, where you're given what's provided to you from underneath, there is not much support at all for PSS, at least on the ones that I'm used to. I'm a Java developer on the server. Few people do use Java in the world, like a lot. And in order to get PSS, you have to install different security providers, pull it from different places. Like it's not a trivial thing. So the reason for asking for RSA 1.15 was to have some base level amount of support from the underlying platform. And there's been a lot of pushback on it. I get the pushback. PSS is better, but it's not like there's no actual vulnerability in 1.5. So it's the
yeah. Okay. All right, Joe.
but I'm not going to die on it. Like, we've had the conversation over and over again, and so that's why I'm not up here as usual. Like, it's the same thing.
All right.
Joe, this is Joe Hildebrand. Did we capture all of that in that? If you click through there, is that captured so we don't have to ask again the next time? Okay. And so if Brian, did you already send the link? Okay, cool. I haven't been following. So I mean, all I'm saying is let's just make sure that we've captured, you know, the way that it's hard in a way that we don't have to keep asking. If it's in this, then that's fine. It doesn't look like there's, for example, doesn't look like there's a link off to the Java docs here of it not working in the base stuff. Just suggesting a way to continue.
I think that would actually really help, because basically we're going to get pushback when this goes through the AD. This is going to be a thing. So I mean, I understand your point, but we just have to be prepared that.
Yeah, let's just make sure that we capture the reasons why, and whichever way the working group decides,
right.
Make sure we've said, oh, and by the way, Java developers can pack sand, or this is why we're doing 1.5. Okay. Either way.
So Dave, if you can just make sure that that's in the minutes, that we're going to try to make sure we capture for the RSA version 1.5 stuff, that they point to the Java specs and the issues with implementing it. All right, folks. So that is like raging agreement at this point. So I'm really happy, and thank you very much for not being too mean to me. And you get some time back in your life. Thank you very much.
What was the draft that Jim was talking about provided by?
That's the main algorithm. It's the main path. Whatever the message draft. Hey man, what's up? Are you next? I'm next. Okay, cool. I'm not trying to push you out. You finished early enough that there's no hurry. What are you doing here? Web push. Okay, so I'm the what push monkey and web push. I like the big red box. Yeah. I don't think I wrote my name on it. Probably not. So I get making sure yeah, I mean, I feel his pain, right? So yeah, Steven is gonna. That's gonna be a thing. So here's what. Yeah, oh, that's excellent. Thank you. So if I was the sort of person that wanted to not have 1.5, yeah, I have to use how to do this in Java and show that it wasn't in the end. That's effort. I'm just saying, like, if you really didn't want to have it, that I did come to me. I didn't do that. The problem is, well, right. I know that's why I was like, all right, you gotta. It's like we see the whole time. Right. I was just saying, yeah, I would say you guys pack sand, like you gotta. There's some reality to come to there because they're gonna cause a lot of